a Jeepin' with Cool Guy video. It totally makes your day. Good afternoon, boys and girls. On today's episode of Jeepin' with Cool Guy, we're going to talk about the differences in the frame structure of a 76 to 81, maybe 80, 81, and then from 82 to 86. A frame from 76 to 86 will fit either, any one of those CJ7s in that decade of time. But there is slight differences between the frames from 76 to 81 and then from 82 to 86. And we're going to go over those in just a moment here. And one of the reasons that we're going to go over the differences in the frame is so that if you need to replace your frame, you can know what to look for depending on whether you want to be period specific or model specific and as accurate as possible. But to each their own. This one in particular is for a 79 Jeep CJ7, which you may have grasped from watching other videos. But the other thing we're going to show you is there's actually serial numbers on these frames. Depending on how good a shape the frame is in, you can have matching numbers between your frame, your engine, and your VIN number. So it's really kind of cool. Another thing that we're also going to do today is we're going to replace the rear cross member. Just got one in and we're going to weld this thing on because this usually rusts out and it's normally a problem for everybody. So we're going to go through that and do that. Alright, so let's start with the front of the frame. Pretty much everything from the very front, cross member back to the shock tower mounts is identical. There's really no variance between that. Maybe a couple holes, but there really isn't anything that's functionally different. The shock towers are the main component that provide the difference between 76 to 81, 81, or 82 to 86. On the other Jeep, and there's a video that I have of removing the shock towers. They are the tall ones. They're about up to here, and they're completely separated. They're pieces that unbolt, and they require a longer shock tower. And the reason behind that is because the 76 to 81 used narrow track axles. So when they went to the wide track axles in 82, they needed a wider and a taller stance for the shocks. With the 76 to 81, the shorter shock towers for the narrow track axles are welded onto the body right above this, I don't know what purpose this hole serves, but there is that hole through the frame. And then it's also right next to the axle bump, right here. Another small difference is this kind of center back cross member. I don't really know why they took this out, but this serves just the purpose of providing a little bit more support between the frame right in front of the rear shock towers. These rear shock towers are the exact same from 76 all the way to 86. The only real difference is this cross member. And this is welded in about a ½ inch in front of the shock tower on the bottom, the top, and the inner sides. There are a couple clamps, like brake line clamps that connect to this thing. But if you see a frame and this doesn't exist, then it's 82 to 86. One other difference is the leaf spring rear mounts on the front and the rear. Minor differences. Structurally exactly the same. But on the 76 to 81, and maybe the CJ5s even earlier, they have these little notches cut out of them. Nothing really big, it's just a design detail. Now the other side of that is the either replacement or the 82 to 86. You can see that they're smooth, there's no cutout. Structurally, like I said, exactly the same. I had to replace this one because the previous owner had switched out the leaf spring hanger on this and moved it around, so I had to get a replacement for it. So I'm kind of disappointed because it's not completely accurate, and the one that I had taken off of the body was so bent that I couldn't do anything about it. So this is just a matter of welding it on the sides and on this outer lip, but those are the design details between the two. Okay, so let's start getting into more of the matching numbers type stuff, because that's the thing that really kind of gets me all geeked up. This is the rear passenger side on the upper curvature of the frame between the gas tank crossmember mount, where the body mounts are, and the shock mount that is just forward of this about a foot. Here is stamped in a series of letters and numbers, and if I can read this right, it's J something something 311 U827. I have no idea. I mean, I'd have to try and figure out how that matches up. But the cool thing about it is that if your frame is in good enough shape, you're going to have the serial number, the matching number to the engine and everything else stamped in this. It's also stamped under the underside of the rear crossmember. So this rear crossmember, not rear, this is the, I don't know, mid-frame crossmember. This is the one that the brake line mounts to, rear brake line, and the gas tank, and it has the body mounts on it. Anyways, right up in here, or somewhere on this underside plate, you'll see a series of 3 numbers, or groupings of numbers. And that gives the actual manufacture date of your frame. And mine is, let's see, where is it? Right here. It's 3/24/79. So March 24th, 1979 was when this particular metal piece was stamped and created. Also, if you're lucky enough, it's also in the main frame part right underneath this on both of the arms. Let me see if I can see that number. I would show you these things, but I can't even make them out in real life, let alone on camera. So this was 3/24/79. Okay, so I guess all of this stuff was made on the same day and welded together and stamped. So that's really kind of cool. So if you're looking for the collector type scenario and you want to have matching numbers, this is how you can find them. Alright, so let's weld some stuff. We're going to replace the rear crossmember. This has a habit of rusting out, usually on the body mounts, and sometimes depending on how much of your back frame is rusted out. Like this frame was immaculate, and you know, outside of a couple little scenario or things that I had to fix, like I had to grind off a whole bunch of roll cage, roll bar welds that the guy had put on there. But one of the things he had done is he had cut off the outer side, outside of the crossmember, because he put a fiberglass tub on this thing and put another bumper on it. So anyways, want to replace that. You can get these in various places. You can get it from Morris, 4x4, you can get it from Quadratech, you can get one from Classic Enterprises, and they're all very similar, if not exactly the same for the most part. This one I believe is the Crown automotive piece. About $70, $80, give or take. I think the one from Classic Enterprises is more expensive. It's more like $120, $110. But the nice thing about that is they do an incredibly accurate representation or replication of it. But they also don't coat it with anything, where the Crown and the Omixeta and a couple other ones do it, where you have to grind off all of the powder coating or paint, whatever it is that they have on here. Anyways, so the details of how you do this is actually really simple. Once you cut off and grind down the welds of the previous crossmember and make whatever frame repairs that you need back here, luckily I didn't have to make any, then all you need to do is slide this thing over the end of your frame. Oh, let me point out one thing. When you are cutting off this crossmember and repairing your frame, you want to make sure that you leave as much metal on the end of the box frame as you can to be as completely accurate. And you want these things to be level from all the way across, so that when you fit this thing on, it not only fits on nice and easy, but you've also got a nice contact area between the crossmember, the crossmember and the frame on those metal ends on both sides, so you can get a nice solid weld, and you're not have to fill up a gap of like a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch. So I've done that, measured it out multiple times, ground things down so we have everything nice and level and connected. Then what you want to do is measure this thing out, make sure that it's centered on the frame, and then grind off whatever it is that's coating this. And then you also want to take off the coating that you've put on your frame so that you can get a good contact weld. I'm not endorsing anything here, but I did this whole frame in 2 things. I used the Eastwood internal frame coating, and that stuff is really awesome. It took about, if you want to do it really nice and thick, I would say about 3 cans. So I think they're about $20 a piece, $18 a piece. So basically about 60 bucks, and you can completely do the inside of your frame. Then the outside is done with it's from Magic Paint. It's called Chassis Saver. And this is the semi-gloss version of it, and it's got 2 coats on it. And it's kind of like a Pour 15, and a lot of those other rust, paint over rust type stuff, rust sealants and so on. When you put this stuff on, I did it with a paintbrush to get into the grooves or the small seams, and a roller brush for the outside. But when you get this stuff on, this stuff is like rock hard. It's really impressive, and it's got a great look to it. The only thing that's kind of a problem about the Chassis Saver is that it's UV sensitive, UV light sensitive. So once you get this all done, go over it with a can of Rust-Oleum semi-gloss black paint or whatever you want to cover it in. But you want to get something over the top of the Chassis Saver so that, you know, the sunlight doesn't hit it. Now this is primarily the frame, so it's not going to see any sunlight, but like the front of the frame, out in front of the grill, that's going to get plenty of sunlight. What happens is the stuff turns gray, kind of oxidizes it, from the UV light. So it doesn't like hurt the paint, it just turns it a different color, it turns it gray. So if you're going to do that, and you're going to do it the way that I did it, then I would put a coat or 2 of spray paint on top of your Chassis Saver frame coating. In the end, it looks really good. So let's get this thing ground out. You can already see where I've started to grind off the areas where I'm going to weld it on. I'm going to get this stuff all ground out, then we'll measure it out, get it all aligned, and weld it on. Alright, you can see where I've ground off all of the Chassis Saver and on the crossmember where I'm going to weld the 2 pieces together. And you want to make sure that you have a good clean surface, because you don't want to, you know, weld junk into this. So one thing to that, do this in a well ventilated area, because something about the Chassis Saver or these coatings when they heat up and they start to melt or burn from welding, I guess it's toxic. So make sure that you've got great ventilation when you're doing this. Or if you did this before you put on your chassis paint, you probably don't have to worry about it. But I just want to call that out, safety measure. And one other thing. On the other Jeep, the 84, I used, I can't remember what it's called, it's like Rust Solutions. It's a rear bracket, fabricated structural bracket that you can put on these areas and weld them in when this rear or this rear frame end rusts out. And this primarily is where, like, almost all CJs, if they're going to rust out, the frame rust out, because there's no drainage behind here. The way that they welded it in, this was kind of welded in almost as a complete enclosed box, and there's no drain ports back here. So you get water that comes in through the frame and mud, and it builds up right back in here, and then this whole thing rusts out. So the Rust Solutions bracket is a nice way to go. I put one of those on the 84, and then I also replaced the cross member because that thing was definitely not in anywhere near as good a shape as this one is. But the thing that I found is when I did the cross member, when I put the bracket on and welded the bracket on, it's a taller, it adds about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/16 of an inch to the height of the rear box part of the frame. So I had to cut out the bottom part of the cross member so that it would fit over there. What I mean is, or what I'm trying to describe is, see how this just slides on here nice and easy because it fits right around the end of the box? What happened is that it created another 3/16 of an inch down here, and this part was not fitting on there, so basically it was this. So I had to cut that out so that I could slide that on. If you need to replace that, and you need to replace this, or weld that in, just take that to note that that will more than likely happen. Okay, so let's get this thing measured up, get it aligned perfectly. I'm going to go from the body mount to the frame and get this all nice and aligned. When you're doing this, make sure that you are about as accurate as possible. This is like measure 7 times, weld once. Because once you get these structural pieces into place, this has a body mount on it. And the last thing you want to do is have this body mount off by like 1/2 inch or something like that. Because when you go to put your body on, you can't get this lined up, and you can't, your poly or your rubber bushings aren't going to align, and you're going to have to grind this thing out, and it's a complete nightmare. So be as accurate as you can in your alignment for these. Alright, I think we're good to go. I've measured this, so what I've done is, using my highly technical measuring tape, just from the inside lip of the measuring edge to the very outer edge of the frame, I've got it marked at 2 3/8. Okay, if you're off by 1/16 of an inch, not a big deal. 1/8 of an inch might be pushing it. I don't think you want to be outside of that. Alright, I'm going to go weld stuff. These things are not precision vehicles by any means, and I actually wanted to point something out before we weld all this stuff together. AMC was not renowned for its detail, or quality for that matter, especially within the Jeeps. So if you're just getting into welding in your restoration or resto-mod or whatever it is that you're doing, and you're like, God, I don't know how to weld, man. The great thing about it is that the welds on these frames are horrible. So unless you do a completely catastrophic job of welding, you're pretty much going to look just like factory welds. It is. There's a lot of discussion on the forums around, God, are the welds really that bad on the frames? Yeah, they really are. They're really kind of pathetic. And even on some of the body components where it wasn't done as a spot weld and it was done by hand, just horrible weld jobs. Anyways, let me show you an example of that. So this right here is the driver's side cross member top cross member right in front of the rear cross member. And this is a factory weld right around here. So you can see that there is no dime laying, where it's nice and smooth. It is like burned in and it's rough, and then there's this piece out here, and then it cuts in here, and it wanders all over the place. It looks like somebody almost like did a solder weld on it after running it through a meat grinder. So do not be concerned about it, especially once you get the chassis saver on here. You'll be amazed at how good it looks, and that your welds are going to look exactly like factory. Alright, got my welding get up on, and let's do this. So I'm going to weld each connection to the frame and the cross member in 4 places. Across the top, a little notch on the bottom, and on both vertical connections. And I'm going to leave a little bit of space at the bottom on the inside of the frame and the cross member, so that it can actually drain more than it did from the factory, hopefully. Anyways, so let's weld it out. Alright, ooh, that's hot. Still warm. Let me give you a close-up of the welds so you can see what I'm talking about. Not the perfect weld ever. This isn't exactly something I'm going to submit to welding.com. But, I got some nice dimes going on here. Got some good penetration. You can tell just by the discoloration in the metal. But I want to show you what happened to the backside here. So right here and right here, I just basically this stuff caught fire and just burned off the back. So that's why I want to make sure that you're in a well ventilated area. So I open up the garage door and let it all vent out. Anyways, that's how you can tell if you got good penetration, because you can see the discoloration between the metal and all of the coating just basically burned off. So I'm going to have to sand this down, make it nice and smooth, so that when I paint over it, it doesn't show up. Alright, boys and girls, there we go. Another episode of Jigging with Cool Guy, a little bit of welding, a little bit of serial number finding, and some details on whether your frame is from 76 to 81 or from 82 to 86. I'm really happy with the way this came out. Moving on to the next step, now I gotta start putting the suspension back on, which is really kind of cool, because this is the point when I really enjoy this whole restoration thing. It's kind of like turning the corner. When you're almost done with coming in out of the garage covered in rust dust and metal shavings and junk and all kinds of crap, and you're not putting masks on to keep stuff out of your face. Now we're starting to build. That's the fun part. You start seeing it come together and it almost comes alive. So anyways, alright, next episode.